Happy Sunday, everyone. Happy Pride. Happy 51st anniversary of Stonewall riots. Lex here. I am so excited to be hosting this conversation with Miss Maine. Miss Maine, who is Carolyn Brady, is actually one of my longest life friends. And so I am just so incredibly humbled and grateful to be having a conversation with the first person who I told I was trans in elementary school, who is also just a kick-ass, go-getter, hustler, unbelievable human. And so today we are going to be having a conversation about Miss America, about Maine most specifically, because I went to college at Bowdoin College, which is in Brunswick, Maine, and Maine was my home for 4 years, for the summers of many of those years as well. And so I have had the just opportunity to really have Maine be my home, to understand the Maine community. I lived in Portland for quite some time, had 2 separate apartments there, and worked for Equality Maine, an organization in Maine that is pushing for the equality, for the equity of LGBTQ people throughout the state. And so hosting this conversation with Carolyn, who is a part of Miss America, who is Miss Maine, is such a fantastic opportunity, because when I think of Miss America, the first thing that comes in mind is the original creation of Miss America, based on, as many folks may know, specific gender stereotypes or ideals based in femininity and what it means to be a woman. And so today, Carolyn and I will be talking about the different experiences that I have had as a non-binary transmasculine person, in addition to what does the potential of Miss America, like, what does it hold? What is the potential of Miss America for supporting folks who are, whether gender fluid, gender queer, etc., and the ways in which the organization at large can better support folks who are like me, who are trans and want to be seen and want to be heard. So here she comes. Come on. Yes! Oh my god.
I'm so excited. You don't even know how excited I am. I'm so
You
excited.
don't know how excited I am. When you texted me and you were like, I need to request something, and I was like, I'm so happy that you reached out to me. Yes, I'll do anything you want.
I love it. I love it. My day one, like, literally.
Dead truth.
Okay, so I know that we have sort of like transitioned because you are hosting, but I am interviewing. But this is like a collective conversation because, you know, that's what true love is all about. Love you, boo. So I know your people know who you are, but do you want to tell those in the Miss America realm who you are?
Of course. So my name is Lex Horwitz. I use they, them pronouns, and I identify as a queer, non-binary, transmasculine Jewish human. And for me, I work as an LGBTQ plus educator, activist, model, and mental health advocate in West Philadelphia. And so a lot of those terms may be unfamiliar to folks who are watching, and that is perfectly okay. That is why we are here. We are going to have this conversation. We're going to break down these terms, hopefully be able to add context and my own personal experience, because there are people behind trans identity. We are humans too. And so just sharing our stories and hopefully having whether it's empathy or support based on our experiences is something that we can get out of this conversation.
So incredibly true. So based on that, and we're going to break all of that down in a minute, but do you want to tell the lovely story of how we know each other? Because it actually should be its own CNN special.
I think it needs to be its own movie, book. Like, we need to be signed for some shit.
I love it. I live. I'm here for it.
Yes. So Carolyn and I met because we went to the same all-girls school, the Baldwin School in Bryn Mawr, PA, growing up. And so I was actually at Baldwin, this all-girls school. I'm going to stop using quotes because my fingers are going to hurt. But, like, when I say all girls, like, it's not actually all girls. That's just what they call it. So Baldwin, the all-girls institution, a private school that was primarily for those who are very privileged and who are white, was in Bryn Mawr. And I went there from pre-K through my senior year, which was its own experience. I'm sure we can talk about later. Carolyn, what year did you leave Baldwin?
So I was there kindergarten through 5th grade, and then I went to co-ed school in the city.
Yes, in
Yep.
Canada, yes. And where I got to still see
I know.
you. Yes. And so I distinctly remember that I came to my trans identity when I was around 3 years old, which is something we can talk about later. But more specifically to my relationship with Carolyn is that in first grade, I was having a very difficult time adjusting to the fact that my mom would drop me off and I wouldn't get to see her, and my sister was in a different school building because she was 11 months younger than me, and I needed someone to help me to help me feel loved, to help me feel calmed down, and so that I could get through the day. And our first grade teacher, Carolyn, and I were in the same first grade class.
Miss Morgan. All hail to her. We're here for it.
Yes, and I literally saw her last summer, and I love it so much. But so Miss Morgan was our first grade teacher. We were in the same first grade class, and I don't know how it happened, but Miss Morgan assigned Carolyn to be my morning reader. So Carolyn would come to the door and like take my hand, and we go to the back corner where all the books were in like little beanie bags, and Carolyn would read to me until I hopefully stopped crying and was ready for the day to begin. And so one of those days I came into class and Carolyn was getting ready to read me our book of the day. And I just said like, "Hey, Carolyn, my name's Lex actually, and I'm a boy." And she was like, "Okay, cool." And like, that was it. Like acceptance, love, like support, like no questions asked. Just like, okay, you're the same exact human. This is just more of the authentic you. Let's just read this teddy bear book or like whatever it was, right? Like, why are you interrupting my story? Like, I'm trying to read to you. I'm doing this good thing. I didn't ask to be this person for you, Lex. But okay, young child who is a boy.
That's like the most Carolyn 5-year-old impression one could ever give. Like, it's great. Yeah.
I know you so
okay,
well.
awesome.
You have no
Next
clue.
Question.
And then we ended up going to the same college, which is its whole other story.
Hilarious. So what's that like? Almost 10 years, because we were in first grade when we were 6, and then we started at Bowdoin when we were 18.
Yeah.
Yeah, like literally the Delta X is huge.
Exactly. And the other thing that I think is so important to talk about was that although I had like vocalized to you at a very young age, like I do not identify with being a girl. The only thing that I can see is that you're either a girl or a boy. So I'm going to identify with boys because of masculinity. But I also was consistently told that I wasn't allowed to be that person. So I remember like Miss Morgan, who's an incredible person, right? Must like heard someone refer to me as Lex and as a boy, probably thought I was being bullied. God knows, I don't know. And so in front of the whole class said, "Lex is dead name. Lex is a girl." I don't know if she was trying to protect me or whatever it may be, but I know that our educators, our communities were not ready to support trans people because they didn't even know who trans people were, especially in spaces that are so deeply gendered, right? Our school, the Baldwin School, is made for young girls empowering women, right? Like becoming these empowered, strong women. It was beautiful messaging for people who identified as women, but also if you weren't a woman in those spaces, where did you exist? And so I remember when Carolyn switched schools in the middle school, like high school times, I would sometimes see Carolyn when we were at different sporting events. And Carolyn would so interestingly bring up like, "Oh, like Lex, remember when like you said you were a boy and your name was Lex," when like I was still going by my dead name and like had tried so succinctly to perform femininely and to not be seen as non-normative because it was so dangerous at Baldwin and in my community to be something that wasn't a woman. And so Carolyn would say that and I'd be like, "Oh, no, that never happened. Like, what are you talking about, Carolyn? Talk about literally anything else." And then you fast
also
forward.
very quintessential Carolyn story.
Yeah, but also like you obviously had no idea that like that was something that could be triggering or potentially unsafe. Whereas like for me, I was like, "Oh my God, like I don't want anyone to think of me in like these non-normative ways because I've had to put on such a," I call my entire life a drag show. Like I am the world's best drag performer. Like bitches, I fooled you all for 14 years at that all-girls school. Like I came through and everyone like believed the performance. And then I got to college, which also coincidentally was the first year that I came to my queer identity via sexuality. And then my sophomore year, I took my first gender, sexuality, and women's studies class. I read Jack Halberstam's Female Masculinity book that pretty much said, like, just because you're female doesn't mean that you have to be a woman. You can be female, you can present yourself masculine, feminine, whatever it may be, but like you're not limited to those restrictions. And my brain just went, oh my gosh, that makes sense to me. And so ironically in college was also the time that I was able to come to my trans identity in a safe environment that was willing to love and accept me. My family loves and accepts me. They just didn't have that environment or that language. So Carolyn being truly one of the first people that I felt comfortable sharing my transness, my queerness with in first grade, we also, our paths then connected again in college, and Carolyn got to see me transition and continue today to transition into my most true, authentic self. And that is just, I think, one of the most beautiful stories. And Carolyn, I love you.
I'm just so grateful that that our paths have crossed in a way that allows us to be so incredibly supportive of each other, and then use the platforms that we've developed and grown to have over time to continue to share that. I mean, not that I should ever be a model for like what young 5-year-olds should be like, but if every trans 5-year-old in like all girls school came up and they were like, okay, so I go by Lex, and I'm like, great, next question.
Yeah. Yeah, like we love it. Thank you for informing us.
Jolly Rancher
Next.
color will change? No. So
no, now I want my Jolly Rancher to be pink and blue, obviously. Yes. Obviously. Do we have the mystery white like one
on my outfit? Like, thank you.
Yeah.
In a uniform school. So
let's talk about them kills.
Yeah. Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh, I love that. But now, think about 5-year-old us and then 15-year-old us doing sports together. It's going to be almost 25-year-old us. Who ever could have thought that 20 years ago we would be here today? Insanity.
Who would have thought we were doing what we're doing?
I know. It's like
Miss Maine? I'm a model? What?
I know. What? See, honestly, Baldwin should give us all the credit in the entire world. Like, what?
Yes. Like, you wanted hustlers, and we are your hustlers.
For real.
But you also better not use us for your promo, because God knows.
We're not about that. We're not about
God knows.
If you're going to talk the talk, you got to walk the walk. Walk it. Look. All right. So before we go off into the whole, like, Carolyn Lex life fest for all of history and time, let's go into a little bit of the, like, breakdown of what we need to know today, because my hope is that out of this we get a lot of constructive information. As I'm sure you know, the Miss America organization is very heavily rooted in gender identity, gender expression, and so I think it would be really useful for at least viewers for the Miss Maine specific audience, and then anything that we were to bring to the larger conversation around gender diversity in the Miss America organization. A lot of like the crash course for here's what we need to know to be better allies, to maybe come to a better realization of our own gender expression and identity, and like factual evidence as to, okay, I could write a term paper with like these vocabs. So let's start with the gender definition, be sex definition, be gender identity, gender expression. Like, give me the bullet points.
Got you. Yes. So a quick little Trans 101 course, which is by no means comprehensive. And you can find even more detail of resources and videos and links to articles and even books on my website. So please check that out if you would like more information than the very surface level definitions I'm about to give. But so as Carolyn just said, when we think about someone's identity in sex and gender terms, there's actually 3 separate definitions that we want to be looking at. There's gender identity, gender expression, and sex assigned at birth. And so I am going to give all of those definitions and describe how these terms kind of interlink to create all of the beautiful, vast identities that exist in humanity. So starting with gender identity is it's in the mind. So anytime I think of, I'm a very visual person. So for our visual folks out there, when you think of gender identity, I want you to think of internal, in the mind, stored in this very, very personal space that only the person themselves have access to. So gender identity is someone's internal sense of self. It's how they understand themselves to be a man, a woman, non-binary, agender, pangender, etc. So someone's gender identity comes from within them. No one outside of that individual has the ability, authority, or power to say what someone else's gender identity is, because only that person knows, because it's how they feel. In the sense that, Carolyn, how do you identify your gender?
I identify as a girl. Would that be the appropriate association?
Yes.
that?
Yes. So the gender terms that we use are girl, woman, man. There's some folks use like king as like a very masculine, empowered like gender term. Yes, it's
Wait,
very.
is that a thing?
Yes. So many
So can
of.
I identify as superior?
You should.
Is
You
that
should.
a little too dictatorial?
You should be like. You should identify fully as a queen. I think that would be.
You know, I got a sparkly hat for that.
Yes. I mean, why? Like, the truth is, this is my personal opinion, but like, America is based on anti-blackness, based on white supremacy, and so the fact that our society has never respected, loved, and cherished and uplifted people of color means that like, like if like you are like, I am a superior queen, or like I'm a queen, or I'm a king, like, please identify as that, because that is your truth. Like, that is just like, so like I saw a picture of my friend Sebastian this morning. It was a pride post, and he was in the street with his pride flag, and he's a black trans man, and he is just, his energy is beautiful. And the only language I had to describe how I felt was this king. So I just commented like, king, so many hearts, right? Like, we have to uplift and support the people in our lives, particularly people of color, because our government, our like medical system, our housing, our healthcare, etc., isn't willing to do that. So like, we got to do that. Sorry, I always go on those.
That's okay. Love it. Tons of hearts.
Tons of hearts. But so Carolyn identifies as a woman, right? Yeah. Carolyn, you are a man.
I disagree with that.
Why?
I feel like a woman. Like,
enough said.
Yeah.
Enough said. Exactly. And by the way, I would literally never do that to someone. But
correct.
That was
for exemplary
never
purposes.
do that to anyone. That was my example of saying like, it's internal. So Carolyn told me I am a woman. And I'm like, no, you're a man. I, as an outsider, have literally no ability, power, or authority to tell Carolyn what her gender identity is.
True.
No government official, no parent, no sibling, no teacher, nobody has the ability to tell anyone outside of themselves what their gender identity is. So thank you, Carolyn, for playing along with me.
Of course, I'm here for the role play. So that's gender. So I would like to, can I just paraphrase really
yes,
to make sure
please.
I got it? Okay. So in full, if I had to like Carolyn translate this, for gender identity, it is how you and only you identify and how you feel you identify.
Yes.
And so if I had to put this in the like, please give an example section of vocab test, it would be like, no one, and I mean no one, has the audacity to tell you how you identify.
Oh my God. That's going to be my ringtone for everything now. I am going to screen record this afterwards and just have that playing forever, because that is it. That is it. Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so gender expression, what is that?
But before we go into gender expression, I also wanted to say that there are very specific terms that are associated with the definitions that we use. And it's very, very common that we conflate the terms that we use for gender identity, which are the gender terms, such as woman, non-binary, man, agender, identifying as not having a gender, pangender, identifying as having multiple genders, demi boy, demi girl, identifying partially or fully with the identity of boy or girl, right? Those are gender terms that we use to label or to be able to express to others outside of ourselves what our gender identity is. Now, it is very, very common that those gender identity terms are incorrectly conflated with either gender expression terms, gender expression being how someone chooses to present themselves, right? How they are expressing themselves to the world. So gender expression is almost the opposite of gender identity in the sense that gender expression is completely and fully external. It has to do with your presentation, whether that's the clothing you wear, the accessories you put on your body, how you decide to present yourself with makeup, with jewelry, how you decide to cut your hair, your mannerisms, your tone of voice, the true way that you navigate externally in society is as external. And the words that we use for gender expression, right, how you choose to express yourself externally are feminine, masculine, and androgynous. Now, again, we are using the terms that society has already dictated, has already defined in very binary, very restrictive ways. So I am not saying that that is the only forms of expression out there. Those are just the traditional, the historical terms that our society has used to understand expression. And so what I want to share with folks is that if we understand our gender identity to be what is inside, right, it is internal, only we know, the complete opposite would be how we're expressing ourselves. For many folks, their gender expression can align similarly with their gender identity, in the sense that in our society, people say that if you are assigned female at birth, you have to be feminine and you have to be a woman, right? That misconception that all three of the sex assigned at birth, the gender expression and gender identity align, which is a myth because it doesn't align with for everyone. It certainly can align for many folks, for many cisgender folks, folks who identify with the gender they are told with at birth. So for example, we're getting a lot of terms. So I would be a transgender person in this conversation. I am a person who was told that I had to be one gender when I was born based on my sex assigned at birth. And I, with getting to understand myself and who I am, realized that I did not associate myself, I did not know myself to be that gender. That movement away, that recognition that I am not the gender I was told is the trans identity, right? I am a different gender, I identify with a different sex than I was assigned with at birth. Whereas on the other hand, the word I just used, cisgender, would be someone like Carolyn, someone who is assigned a sex at birth and they identify with that sex or they identify with that gender that they are assigned at birth. So that is the cisgender definition versus the transgender definition. And within, whether you are cisgender or transgender, we all use our expression to show ourselves to the world. So whether you are a cisgender woman like Carolyn or you are a trans masculine person such as myself, we use clothing, we use our hair, we use makeup or nail polish or jewelry or whatever it may be to present ourselves in the same way that both trans people and cis people have a gender identity.
Right.
Right? So Carolyn right now is, in our historical or traditional terms, presenting somewhat femininely, right? So we have longer hair, we have earrings, right? We're doing those associations. Whereas for me, I have, although I typically identify myself as a masculine person, my presentation is very masculine, wearing a button-down shirt, I have very short cut hair, but my energy, right, the way that I use my mannerisms or my voice is very feminine. So a part of my expression is both masculine and feminine, which some folks would also label as androgynous, androgynous being either a mix or a combination of both masculinity and femininity. And the other thing is that someone's gender expression can change in a second, in the hour, in the day, in the year. So I'm wearing a button-down unicorn shirt right now. I could go upstairs and get my sheer purple, like sparkle tunic dress and put it on, and I would have the same exact gender identity as a non-binary transmasculine person. The only thing that I've changed is my gender presentation from being more masculine to being more feminine, which is, and I know you're about to say something, which is perfect.
Go ahead. No, go.
But before you do, yes, just wanted to say that the misconception is that you can look at someone and understand their gender identity, which is false. That is a complete myth. When you look at someone, you see their gender expression. You see in that one specific moment how they are choosing to present or express themselves to the world. If you saw me on the street, you have no idea what my gender identity is because I don't know, maybe I'm wearing a skirt that day or I'm wearing my button down or I'm wearing literally no clothes with my underwear. Like God knows, like you do not know. You do not know what my gender identity is based on my clothes. You only know this is a human who is presenting masculinely on this day or femininely or androgynously or a mix of everything. Or you know what, I'm not even going to label it because I just like their vibe. But you do not know what my gender identity is unless you're my friend and we've had conversations about my gender identity, unless you're someone who follows me on social media and pretty much the only thing I talk about is my gender identity. Or you happen to be a human who I'm interacting with. I'm getting a cup of coffee and this person asks me like, oh, like how can I like best respect you? Like what pronouns do you use? Right? Then I can say like, oh, I use they, them, and I identify as non-binary, right? Unless you ask me, unless we have that conversation or you somehow otherwise know who I am, you do not know my gender identity unless we have that conversation because of the fact that it's internal. You will know my gender expression. That means nothing about who I am as a person. So now, Carolyn, take it away.
Okay, so thank you for you know, I'm a recapper. I love like not boxing things, but I love recapping to make sure I understand exactly.
And I'm going to record every single one of your recaps and use it as a different ringtone.
So we've got gender identity, gender expression, sex assigned at birth. I feel like sex assigned at birth is really the easiest one to go through first. So that means that a doctor pulled me out of my mother and said, great, I'm checking this box based on what you look like, correct?
Okay. Can I go into sex real quick before we do our recap? Yes. And that is absolutely correct. There is a misconception, though, that sex is just based on external genitalia. Okay. So sex, the definition of sex assigned at birth, sex that, like the sex of a person, we are not talking about sexuality. Sexuality is a completely different just realm of identity. Every single person has a sexuality, whether you are transgender or you are cisgender, right? But what we are talking about when we say sex or sex assigned at birth is about, right, bodies, right? That individual identity, not about sexuality, which would be, I love the term with, when I go to sleep, right? When I go to sleep, I am like my gender identity. Like who I go to sleep as is my gender identity. Who I go to sleep with is my sexuality. Those are two different things.
Got it.
And so gender identity and sexuality are different. So when we're talking about sex here, when we're talking about sex assigned at birth, we are talking about the mix of, so the definition of sex is the combination of sex characteristics, which are chromosomes, hormones such as estrogen and testosterone. We're talking about internal and external reproductive organs such as testes and ovaries, etc. We are talking about, so internal, external reproductive organs. So we did external genitalia. I know I'm leaving out. We did hormones. Those are the main ones. I'm missing two right now because I'm going on my rant. Point being is that sex is a mix of sex characteristics, not just external genitalia. Has to do with your chromosomes, your hormones, internal, external reproductive organs. All of these things make up sex. And sex is actually not a binary. We are told incorrectly that sex is male and sex is female. But we know that sex has always been three different categories that are way more expansive than just three sexes. We have male, and why am I saying male first? Female, I always want to put female first. Female, male, and intersex. Intersex is a very broad category. It's an umbrella term, similar to how trans is an umbrella term for folks who are gender fluid, gender queer, or transition, or know themselves to be a completely different gender than what they were assigned at birth, right? In the same sense, intersex is an umbrella term for folks who have a combination of sex characteristics that are both male and female. There is not just one type of intersex person. An intersex person can have a combination of chromosomes and then only one type of internal and external reproductive organs, or may have one set of chromosomes and testes and a vagina, right? The different ways in which the combinations of sex characteristics for intersex people is extremely expansive and vast and diverse, in the same sense that trans identity isn't just you're a trans man or you're a trans woman or you're non-binary, right? Non-binary looks so different depending on who is non-binary. My non-binariness looks completely different than my friends' non-binariness. So point being that sex is female, male, and intersex. And it's because sex is actually this combination of hormones, chromosomes, internal and external reproductive organs, not just when the doctor pulls us out of the womb and looks at our external genitalia and states that our sex is based on this tiny, tiny, tiny thing that is not our sex at all. But yes, Carolyn, you are absolutely right that when we are born, physicians wrongly take it upon themselves to assign our sex based on very limited, very damaging, and oftentimes incorrect information based on the binary of female and male.
Got it. Okay, so taking all that in, to go back to the collective recap, just because I want to make sure we get past the big bulk terms and we get into more of the meat and potatoes of the overall conversation that is this fabulousness. So we've got, for those of you just tuning in, welcome to my 30-second recap of the last 30 minutes. So Lex and I go way, way, way back to the playground and the books, and we were both potty trained, so not that long, but it's awesome. Then we did the overcap of gender expression, gender identity, and sex assigned at birth. Sex assigned at birth is your physical genitalia, internal hormones, reproductive systems, a whole bunch of science, biology-based stuff that assign you a sex at birth. Indeed. So, but ching, was that right, recap-wise?
Yes.
There's a deeper understanding that will be saved for people in the best. So, checkbox. Then we've got gender identity, and that is how you feel. That is internal. That is how you self-identify. That is like, this is what I am saying I am, and you are not going to tell me who I am because I am that, and that is how the English works. It's me, not you.
Yes.
So, that's gender identity.
Full
All
sense.
about me, not about you. But it's on the inside that counts. Gender expression is what's on the outside that counts. So if I am showing up with a ball gown bigger than life to Miss America, that's my expression. If I am rocking every possible Lexism known to man, the sense of fashion, the sense of style, like if I am waltzing my way down a runway in New York Fashion Week, you cannot tell me who I am because that is my expression.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Yes. Perfect.
Awesome. All right. So we've got the terms. We're working with the vocab. Now we're going to move into the more so, what are we talking about? I feel like you touched very interweavingly through those definitions of what transgender is, but can you go into that a little bit more?
Absolutely. And also, Carolyn, incredible, just like synopsis of it all. So thank you so much for doing that, because it's also really important to know that if you are someone who is new to this conversation, whether you are not in the LGBTQ community, or maybe your sexuality is queer, but your gender isn't, this can all be extremely new information. And so if you are feeling confused, or if you feel uncomfortable, or any of these emotions that aren't typically associated with neutrality or like positivity, that is okay. I am happy that you are here listening to this conversation. It took me years to come to my identity, years of my life. And so as someone who doesn't have this as their lived experience, it will likely take time. It will take listening to these conversations or reading articles or engaging in queer content, whether on TV or on social media, to understand and to be able to have this not only acceptance, but this cherishment of the diversity within gender and sex and sexuality. And so I just wanted to note that for folks that are watching, because I don't want anyone to feel like, oh my God, like I just got these 3 different terms, but I don't understand how they're different, because my entire life, like I've been told that they're the same thing, and I've been using gender terms for sex terms or expression terms for gender terms, because that is what happens, right? We commonly incorrectly conflate the terms for sex, right? Male, female, intersex for gender. So I'll ask folks what their gender is, and they may say like, oh, I'm male, or oh, I'm female. But I'll say, that's like, you told me your sex term. Can you please tell me what your gender term is? Your gender term is whether you're a man, a woman, non-binary. And so we make mistakes. We are humans.
Right.
The fact that we're having this conversation means that hopefully we will have more awareness and attention when we go into these conversations in the future to be able to correct those mistakes. We're still going to make mistakes. There's nothing wrong with that. It's the fact that we're taking this attention and this ability and this power to just bring the conversation forward, and hopefully to stop misconflating the terms for one another. So if we mess up the words in this conversation, we will just politely, respectfully correct each other. Just wanted to note that.
Correct.
And so on that note, the terms that we use to understand someone's, whether someone, trying to think of the best umbrella way of doing this. So generally speaking, we all have a gender identity, right? Carolyn's gender identity is that she identifies as a woman. My gender identity is that I identify as a non-binary transmasculine person. We both have a gender identity. If this is Carolyn and this is me, Carolyn was assigned female at birth. Carolyn was told, based on all of the traditional associations, stereotypes, etc. of our society, that Carolyn, you are female, which means that you must be feminine, which means that you must be a woman. These are non-negotiable. This is the way it's going to be. Because Carolyn, as she grew up, was like, I'm being told that I am female. I'm being told that I have to be feminine. I'm being told I have to be a woman. And you know what? This is true. I feel this. I am connected to this. This doesn't feel like something I'm being forced into. This is my lived truth. Okay, so Carolyn's gender assigned at birth, which was being a girl, was connected to her sex assigned at birth, being female. Oh my gosh, my cats are chasing each other. Which, because those two things aligned, and Carolyn is like, at the present moment, I still identify as female. I identify as a woman, which were the two things I was told I had to be. Because you are still connected, cis, that the part of cisgender, cis in Latin meaning on the same side as, if we have some geeks such as myself up in here.
We love the classics, people. Yes.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And so cis same side as gender. So you were told you were a girl, you identify with that gender, your gender you're told to be is the same as the gender that you identify with. You are cisgender. Now,
all right, hold on. I'm going to pause you very quickly. So I am cisgender. Can we just get can you do me a favor and spell that for anyone who's going to go out and Google it?
Yes, I'm going to put it in the comments. Cisgender.
Yes, there we go.
Cisgender is spelled Cisgender. And transgender, I'm putting that in, Transgender. You got me all anxious. I was like, you can spell it.
I'm sorry. We really did go to college.
We went to college. We did our thing.
Okay. Good.
Yes.
Cis, trans. All right, so cis, I am cis. That makes sense. I was like, hey, I agree with like that thing that society told me, and I do. I genuinely do. All right, keep going.
And the truth is that Carolyn, whether this is going to be relatable for you, excuse me, I just hiccuped, or someone else watching this, is that you may be having a conversation with someone and they ask you like if you still identify with your gender or your sex assigned at birth. And that may be the first moment in your life that you've ever been asked if you identify with the identities that you have been forced into. And so you may be 23 years old, right? You may be, are we 23? Oh my God, I really forgot how old we are.
Oh my God, we're pretty old.
Okay, yeah, we out here. But like, point being is that regardless of how old you are when you're watching this, you may have never been asked if you identify with your sex assigned at birth or with the gender you were told you have to be. So you may realize, like Carolyn may very well have said, actually, you know what? Like, I don't really identify with a sex. Like, I don't really like feel a connection to like female or male. Like, I just like, I associate me with my gender identity, and that is still a woman, right? You very well could have different associations or understandings with your sex assigned at birth and with your gender identity wherever you are in your age, your location, etc. And so I wanted to note that like for folks watching this, like you do not need to know what your gender identity, what your gender expression, what your sex assigned, not even sex assigned at birth, what your sex that you like currently identify with, like you do not need to have this language or have these terms. This is simply to help folks have these conversations. So if you're someone who's like, oh, I want to actually ask myself and have that conversation, like, do I actually identify with these things? We can use this language for that. And so as Carolyn said, cisgender is having a gender identity that is the same as the gender that you are told you were assigned at birth. And incorrectly, that gender is inextricably linked to your sex assigned at birth. Because rather than the doctor saying, like, this crying little creature that popped out of a womb, right? I'm going to look at their genitalia. Rather than saying, this child is female, or this child is male, or this child is intersex, which are the sex terms that they are meaning to use because they're looking at the sex, the external, only the external genitalia, not any of the other more relevant parts of sex, right? The chromosomes, hormones, etc. But they use gender terms. They look at the external genitalia, and rather than saying, I'm going to make a very surface level assumption about this child's sex because I see that this child has a penis or the child has a vagina or has a mix of sex characteristics, so they are intersex. They say, oh, I see a penis. This is a boy. Boy is a gender identity term.
Right.
Excuse me, physician. Did you have a conversation with this child that cannot poop on their own, that cannot clean themselves, that cannot feed themselves about what their gender identity is? You did not. You do not know the gender identity of this crying child. You know their sex. And so when Carolyn came out of the womb into this beautiful world of ours, folks looked at Carolyn's sex and incorrectly gave the gender identity term when saying like, this child should have said this is a female child, not this is a girl. Society needs to give folks the space to understand our gender identity on our own terms without putting that onto us. So now when I look at me, similarly to Carolyn, when I popped out the womb and the physician was assigning my sex solely based on my external genitalia, they also misconflated the fact that I was assigned female at birth with being a girl. They said, oh, you have a girl. And so I wanted to point out the ways in which in the medical realm, in the medical just world, gender and sex are also commonly misconflated and used for one another, which we would like to correct.
Right.
And going back to cisgender, transgender. So now transgender, I come into the world, I was assigned female at birth because I have a vagina and I naturally produce estrogen. And I've never
and a list of other biological characteristics that fall in that category.
Exactly, right? And so because of that, I grew up being told that I was a girl, being told that I should wear dresses and wear makeup and have long hair and impress boys, and all of those things were also inextricably linked to heterosexuality and heterosexism. Yep. I realized that the gender that I was assigned at birth, right, being told that I was a girl, wasn't aligning with who I really am, which is not a girl or a boy, as someone who lives outside of the gender binary and just understands myself to be a masculine person. And so for me, the trans part, like the trans in movement, right? So being told, oh, you are this, but that movement to know, like, that is not who I am. That's the transition of going from being told that I am this one thing, but knowing that that is not who I am.
Okay, so to confirm, cisgender, people whose doctor assignment matches their gender identity, which, to recap, is how you feel. Transgender, people whose people whose sex assigned at birth does not match your gender identity, which is how you feel.
Yes. Beautiful, Carolyn.
Beautiful. Love it. All right, so we've got English, gender identity, gender expression, we've got sex, we've got transgender, we've got cisgender, we've got some working definitions. We are going to move this conversation. So, talk to me. I want to break down your name.
Yeah.
And, like, from start to finish. So if I, like, let's just say in the hypothetical world, I sat you down to take the SATs. And it would take
why are you using the SATs?
Because it would take you about 45 minutes to bubble in mix.lex. So, like, once you get, like, right, exactly. So we take every form of your identification after you go through every single bubble in the test.
Yep.
So we're going to start to break that down. So talk to me about your prefix.
Yes. Thank you so much for asking. So my prefix is mix, which I'm going to write down here. You know, I'm going to write my entire name down here.
Love it. Let's do
because that will help.
Do you want to pin that too? I've heard in the world of, like, people that use IG a lot that they pin stuff for reference.
Yes.
I'm not as techie as I should.
I am going to do that. Let's see. So I just wrote my name and I'm going to pin the comment. If it works. There we go. All right. Pinned the comment. So my name is Lex Horwitz, and I'm going to break it down. So mix, for anyone who does not know, is pronounced as in M-I-X, as in mix, like mix you like a cake. Speaking of which, I have a really funny video that actually describes how you pronounce mix, as in, like, mixing it like a cake. So check it out. But for mix is the gender-free, the genderless prefix for folks who do not identify as solely women or solely men. So for me, as a non-binary trans masculine person, I don't feel comfortable with, I don't feel super comfortable with people saying Mr. or Sir. I see that as it's affirming of my masculinity, of my masculine presentation, which I will invite much more so that, and any time before I would ever feel comfortable with someone saying Miss, Ma'am, Mrs., Lady, etc. So when you have Miss or Mrs. and Mr. as the binary terms that folks commonly use as their prefixes, commonly for folks who are binary, right, identify as woman, if you're not married, Miss. If you're married, Mrs. If you're a man, Mr. That is how our society does it. For me, as a human being who is non-binary, I am not a man or a woman. I do not like Mr. It works for my masculinity. If it's someone I don't know, never call me Miss or Ma'am or any of those things. And so mix, for me, is what makes me feel at home. It's the non-binary prefix that can be used that is gender-free associations to have that more, not professional, but like when you want a prefix, right? Like someone's addressing a letter to you or you're introducing yourself at a conference, right? I would say, I am Lex Horwitz. And so now my name is that I, from a very young age, have identified as Lex, right? Like I was Lex my entire life. And so I actually, big update is that I officially had my name and gender, which is actually my sex marker, legally changed at the end of May. And so that is the biggest thing for me. Yes, I'm so excited. I got the news and it was supposed to be in March, and then COVID and the court shut and all of that. So, but then I actually got the same week that we graduated from Bowdoin was the same week that I had my top surgery in 2019, which then you fast forward is the same week that I found out that I had my name and my sex marker officially changed. And so I am legally recognized as Mix Lex Horwitz, sex marker non-binary, which is an X. That is, I'm finally legally recognized as the person that I am, which before that, I tried to convince myself. I was like, you don't need to be legally recognized. Like you know yourself as valid and beautiful. And although that is all true, being legally recognized by your society, by your government is so important. So now that my name is legally recognized, still working on getting it changed in all the documentations, but I had the opportunity to choose a middle name that felt more at home for me, that was a name that I felt comfortable with and didn't feel was, I don't want to say wrongly associated, but my middle name was very feminine. My middle name began with a P. I had been called both my first and my middle name by my grandparents my whole life. So it was something that was just associated with a person who I have evolved into being just a different authentic version of. And so I wanted to still keep the P of my middle name, to just still feel connected to that middle name, because I don't have any animosity towards it. I just don't see that as me at this moment. And so I'm also Jewish. My Jewish identity is extremely important. Am I wearing my necklace? I am. My Jewish identity is extremely important to who I am as a person. And so I wanted to change my Hebrew name as well. And so I'm in the process of changing my Hebrew name, and I wanted to take that Hebrew name also as my official middle name, which is Pe'er, which means glory, splendor, like all things look like big and luxurious. And I chose, yes, you know. And also, according to religious interpretations, also refers to someone with a very big, kind, open heart who is put on this earth to help others. And I was like, that makes sense for me. Like, that is who I am. And so I was like, I just felt this name. And so I chose this name. And so that is my middle name. And I kept my last name, Horwitz, because that's my last name.
And then talk to me about the pronouns. And I'm prefacing this by telling you, I definitely want to make sure that the pronouns get the most comprehensive extent of a conversation as possible, because I think they're really important. And it's one of, I would say, as a cisgendered person who is progressively trying to be as big of an ally and as much of the conversation as possible, that it's, for lack of a better term, the easiest lazy people thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Is identify yourself with your pronouns. It's like, if you don't understand anything, like, identify yourself with your pronouns. So I think that we should have a conversation about that. And then I definitely want to make sure we get to talk a little bit about gender-specific organizations, as that's obviously very relevant to my role.
Yes.
And get to that. So, pronouns.
Also, wait, Carolyn, before we go into pronouns, if you have the time, we can end this live at the hour and we can go and start another live, whether you want it to be 15 minutes or longer than that. That's also an option if you want it to be.
Okay. I want to make sure we keep everyone, so hit pronouns and then we'll read
Got
them.
you. So. Perfect. Yeah, so pronouns are the language that you use to describe someone when you're not using their name. So I use they, them pronouns. They, them is one of, they, them are, there we go, one of the gender neutral pronouns. And similarly with they, them, you also have zir pronouns and you have am pronouns. So there are many non-binary pronouns that have existed, that have been created. I personally just associate myself with they, them pronouns because I have used they, them as the singular just pronoun for folks who I didn't know my entire life. So the example that I always use is if I'm walking down the street and there's one person driving in the car and they throw their Diet Coke out the window and it explodes all over me, I'm like, why would they do that? Like, why would that person throw that out the window? Like, that was so inconsiderate. There's one person in the car and I'm using they, them pronouns. I'm using they, them pronouns because I do not know if that person is non-binary, if that person is a man, if that person is a woman. Even if I had caught a glimpse of what they looked like, we already know that that is their gender expression, so we do not know their gender identity. We always have been using they, them pronouns for singular folks if we do not know if they identify with the pronouns he, him, or the pronouns she, her. So pronouns, as Carolyn said, are a very, very easy way to be an active and effective ally for transgender people. For instance, if you are not trans yourself, if you are cisgender, you can put your pronouns in your email signature. You can put them in your bio. You can even very simply in your bio or your email signature say, ally to trans people. Like, I see you, like my DMs are open. There are so many very easy, tangible things that you can do to visually show your support. And then ideally, if you put your pronouns in your bio, you have people ask you why you're putting your pronouns in your bio. And then you have the conversation, well, people wouldn't be able to know my pronouns if I didn't tell them. So I have to tell them my pronouns. And so not only is it creating visibility and it's showing trans people that pronouns have always been more than just for trans people. They have been for people because we live in a society where we use pronouns. And so having cis people or having cis straight people or having cis LGBT people use their pronouns is a way to not only support trans people and say, like, I know that your pronouns are important and my pronouns are important too, and we need to have this conversation going. Additionally, asking for someone's pronouns is so simple, and it will feel weird. It may feel awkward or uncomfortable the first couple of times that you do it. I have been doing it for years, and it is like, I ask people my pronouns in my sleep. Like, so when I go into a conversation with someone, if it's someone that I do not know, I will start by saying, my name is Lex. I use they, them pronouns. What's your name and your pronouns? If someone knows what pronouns are, they'll tell me what their name and their pronouns are. Or if they're like, what do you mean by pronouns? Well, I'll say, well, the pronouns are used to describe who you are. So if I'm going to use your name in a conversation and say, oh, like I just met Max, would I say Max, like she is so cool, they are so cool, he is so cool? Which pronouns would you use to understand? So like, I then have the opportunity to educate and have a conversation with someone who may not know how to properly either address their pronouns or how to tell their pronouns to other people. So there are so many ways in which to intermix it into the conversation. Or for instance, let's say Carolyn and I haven't seen each other in a year. Let's say I want to check in and make sure that Carolyn is still using she, her pronouns, is still doing the work that she's doing, blah, blah, all those things. I can either in the beginning of the conversation say, hey, Carolyn, like what pronouns are you using? Like what identity terms would you like me to use for you? Right? Like I can very directly ask that question. I can also say, Carolyn, like I would could you please like update me on your pronouns or your gender identity terms? And also if you're uncomfortable with that question, we can just drop it, right? We are not in the business of forcing people to tell us what their identities are, to tell us what their labels are so that we can feel better about them. No, if that's what you're doing, that's wrong. Yes, Carolyn.
So if someone is uncomfortable sharing their pronouns, is it best to always refer to them by their name? So like, let's say I ask you, okay, Lex, so are you comfortable, like your name is Lex, what pronouns are you comfortable using? And you say, I'm not really comfortable, or like, I am currently questioning that. I'm not really comfortable making a decision on that right now. I don't really want to share that with you. I don't feel comfortable enough sharing that with you. Would I then say, okay, hi everyone, today this is my friend Lex. Lex loves to go to the pool and Lex loves to swim a lot. And like would I just continue to enforce the use of their name?
So yes, that is absolutely always something that people can do. So for instance, there are many folks who, for whatever their reasons are, have a difficult time using they, them pronouns. I'm not going to use age or environment or any of those things as excuses, because there aren't excuses. We can all be educated. However, there are some people who using they, them pronouns is extremely difficult. There are always ways that those people can still support those folks who use they, them pronouns, whether that's using apps to practice using pronouns, which are all on my website, so folks can look at that, practice using Zzier, AM, they, them, she, her, he, him, you name it. But so for folks who want to be respectful and make sure that they aren't potentially like harming folks by using the wrong pronouns, using that person's name is always something that can be done. My grandparents try to use my name for everything because they, God forbid, like they don't want to mess up on my pronouns. They will still mess up on my pronouns. We will have that conversation. We'll correct it. Point being, you can always use the person's name. My personal opinion is that I will never be offended if someone uses they, them pronouns for me. I I know that, like, if I don't know someone's gender identity, I will use gender neutral pronouns for that person, regardless of if they're presenting very femme or presenting very masc or whatever it may be. I will still use gender neutral pronouns because my way of respecting someone is by not making assumptions. There are some folks who are very uncomfortable or get very upset if people use they them pronouns for them, because they're like, I strongly, like, how do you not know I'm a man? Or how do you not know I'm a woman? Truth is that there are so many problems with that language as well, because you wouldn't know someone is a man or you wouldn't know someone is a woman by their profession or their dress or etc. So point being is that I strongly believe that using they them pronouns when you do not know someone's gender identity is also something that someone can do in addition to using their name. There may also be people I have heard who are upset if they them pronouns are used because they have, my goodness, my Wi-Fi did something weird, but because they have thought, thank goodness, but because they have fought so hard to be like, I'm a trans woman, like, use she her pronouns, or like, I'm a trans man, like, use he him pronouns. Makes sense. We have had to consistently fight to be seen and recognized and loved as the people that we are. So understand that you can always be coming from a good place, right? That intention is fantastic. We also just need to be considering what those consequences of the language that we use are. However, I always say use gender neutral language, use gender neutral pronouns if you do not know that person's gender identity, because all that you need to do is have a conversation. That person may say like, oh, like, I heard you use they, them. Like, if you could use, like, I use he, him, that would be great. And like, oh, thanks so much for correcting me. We're like, do not be hurt. Like, we are fragile people. That's fine. But like, do not allow your fragility or your uncomfortableness in the conversation or whatever it may be to deter you from engaging in the conversation and uplifting and supporting these beautiful trans people.
Absolutely. So now I want to make sure that this all, not to cut you off, gets saved to the IGTV. So everyone who didn't get to be here for this, we can share it with them, which means we need to make sure we cut this off and choose the appropriate buttons.
That is true.
This, so it does get saved. So I want to quick recap all of this because this is amazing. And obviously this is a much larger conversation that needs to be had. And so there will be continuing conversations after this, date TBD. We've got so much more to touch on. And I'm so glad we were able to get here to do this. So for everyone that for some odd reason does not want to sit or doesn't have the time to sit through everything we just went, and they were like, all right, I need to know today in bite-sized form because, you know, Americans, we have a, like 30-second attention span. That's what commercials are for. So if you were here to watch this commercial and you want to listen to my 30-second recap of how we can all be better allies and be more effective to our trans brothers and sisters and
siblings, yeah,
exactly, siblings, exactly. Here's what we're about to do. Let me tell y'all, we are going to be better allies. First of all, we've got gender identity, we've got gender expression, we've got sex assigned at birth. They do not need to all be the same. So please make sure you are checking in with our friends and to find out what ways people want to choose to identify, to express themselves, what sex was assigned at birth, making sure we follow the fact that they don't all need to fall in line with each other. They can be different. They need to be respected if they are different for people. Those are the 3 terms. We're going to go through the vocab. That's back in the video. Go watch it. Then we've got transgender. We've got cisgender. Cisgender. A doctor told me I'm this. I'm like, yo, Carolyn, you're this. Lex, a doctor told you you're that. You were like, nah, bruh, I ain't that. Recap. Bet. Then we've got prefixes. There's Miss, Mr., Mrs., Mix. All of the above. It's whatever your identity tells you you've got to line up with. And then the names and all that jazz. Go back, watch the video. We're here for it. Your pronouns. Allies, if you listen to nothing else, please introduce yourself with your pronouns. Please respect other people's pronouns. It is so incredibly important. That's the #1 way that we're misgendering people. And that's something that we need to hold ourselves accountable for to be a better part of. Pronouns. What'd you say, Lex? What
pronouns.
Pronouns. Pro what?
Pronouns.
Pronouns. What comes after the, what before the pro? What kind of noun?
Nouns.
What kind of noun? Pronouns.
For everybody.
Pronouns.
Introduce yourself in a work meeting, at a conference, at coffee, to your barista. Literally, use your pronouns in every single instance because it's relevant.
All of the above. Exactly. All right. We've got the recap. We're definitely going to have another one of these diversity discussions to continue. TBD. So much more to talk about. Thank you so much for everything, for sharing all of this amazing information with all of our Miss America followers. I know so many of us have so much to learn in this category, and so I'm so grateful you were able to be here. And can we please make sure we're able to save this because you're hosting for all the technological stuff that's happening on your end.
thank you for being here and engaging in this conversation with me, and I can't wait until next time.
I love you.
Love you. Bye.
It's gonna be fun. Peace out.